I hope you can find an open seat. All right, we're going to get started. Welcome to Sunday School, week 4 for January. And today we're talking about college. We should probably wrap this topic up in about 10 minutes, so you'll have plenty of time to get to the potluck fixings and all that if you need to. It should be easy topic. No problem. All right, I will open us in prayer, and then we'll jump into our discussion. Let's pray. Lord, we ask you for wisdom and clarity in this discussion on education generally and college specifically. May your Spirit convict us of pride and arrogance as we seek to learn and grow with humility. And even when we exhort one another, may we do so with love and humility. Amen.
Amen.
All right, if you or I walked up to someone in our church and just said, out of the blue, so what do you think about college? What about the college question? My hunch is that people would, one, assume a question, because the college question is not a question, right? And then they would think of an answer and jump right into, oh, this is what I think on that topic. So here are some of the questions that people might assume is meant by the college question. And perhaps you fall into some of these categories. Some people might think that refers to, should our children go to college generally? And then they might think the answer is either yes or no, very binary, blanket, yes or no. Someone else might think, oh, that question is about Christian or secular college. And then they might have a take on that. Yet a third person might say, oh, the college question is really about what specific schools should be considered. Like, what's a good college? In fact, I was on an email thread recently where that was the question. Jumped right into, well, what's a good choice for college? And I'll give my bent. I think that's a downstream question. There are upstream questions first. I think my mic, there we go. Someone else might say the college question, for which specific person? In other words, they answer the question with a question. So there are a lot of assumptions that go into the questions that need to be asked. As we know, it's important to ask good questions before you make conclusions. And the higher the stakes, the more questions should be asked before we jump to conclusions. So that's a little warm up. Let's jump into some of the discussion and explore some of the good questions. So gentlemen, let's say that someone in our church asks you out of the blue, what do you think about college? What would be the first thing you'd say, or one of the first things you'd say, in short?
Well, I would probably ask for more context, kind of like what you were just saying. The way I approach these things is not so much whether something is right or wrong. I mean, there are definitely situations where that is true, of course, but something like this, there's not a right or wrong answer. But it can get more right or more wrong the more you understand the person's spiritual maturity, you understand where the kids are at, you understand where they're coming from. So I would want to know more about that. I think in general, if someone's pressing me, I just say it's neutral. I don't have a problem with college. This is one of those areas, too, where I'm happy to share what I think personally for my family, but that may not be, just because I do that doesn't make it the right or wrong answer. This is one of those, this is not where, well, I'm not gay, but it might be fine for you. No, that would be sin regardless. This is a different type of question.
I didn't know we were going to go there. Very good. Although it is relevant these days. Larson?
Yeah, I would agree with you guys. I think obviously it's a loaded question. We all grew up, adults in this room all grew up in a world where where college was assumed. Everybody went to college. That's just what you did. And so the fact that we're asking that question, it assumes that we're not so sure that that's the right way to think about it. I think we have obvious reasons to be skeptical about the value of a lot of college. The stat that you guys have probably heard me share before is that your child would be safer. Their odds of surviving storming the beaches in Normandy are better than a Christian going into a 4-year state school, remaining a Christian by the time they come out. So that's a real stat. It's a real fact that Christian kids go into 4-year state schools and come out unbelievers. So that's a thing. That's a thing we have to recognize and acknowledge. But the bigger question to me is, what is the purpose of college? And in my mind, it's education. And I think that's one of the underlying problems with the way that we moderns think about college is we're so pragmatic, that we think, well, it's a piece of paper that gets you a degree, and so I'm going to evaluate it through the lens of, will it get me a degree or will it get me a good job or not? And do the kids that are getting it, are they heading for a career or not? And I think I don't think that's ever how education has typically been looked at, at least in the Christian tradition. It's about becoming educated. And so if your question is it a good thing for young people to become educated? My answer would be a resounding yes. Is it a good thing for our young people to be challenged and have to work hard in that transition from young adulthood into adulthood? Absolutely. So then it's a question of how do we accomplish that, and who are we talking about?
Very good. Let's address one end of the spectrum briefly and then move on in our discussion here. So let's address the absolute no kind of position for college. And some of you alluded to those reasons. Some might say college across the board is a racket. It's a money-making machine. It's too expensive. You don't actually get anything fruitful out of it. And it's a cesspool of immaturity, and debt is bad. And the whole enchilada is basically worthless. So do either of you hold that position? Are you warm to some of those arguments? Are you an absolute no across the board?
No, well, I think there's probably legitimacy to all those things to some degree. But again, the issue is where is that coming from? What I see a lot in today's culture, in our circles, is a quickness to want to find the blame for why we are where we are. And it's really easy to point to college did this, public school did this, and these things contribute, right? I mean, we don't want to go the opposite direction and ignore it, but part of the problem is it's a desire to want to blame things, but not a desire to actually want to build and fix it. And so part of the college question in this regard, whether, when someone comes up to me and says no, let me give a scenario here. If Daron comes to me and says, hey, would you write a recommendation for our daughter? This is, we've talked about college. Here's what we want to do. I don't question it because I know Daron and I know his faithfulness and I know he and Amy have talked and prayed through this thing. I don't give it a second's thought. But when somebody comes to me and goes, why are they sending their daughter to college? As your pastor, my first thought is, okay, here's a problem here that needs to be addressed. Now, it could be legitimate. It really could be just someone asking, why is that? Like they just want to understand it. They want to talk through it. They think through it. And I'm always happy to do that. But there is when you run across these no exceptions, usually there's something underneath the surface. And that's where I want to dig more to find out, okay, what is going on here that they are completely, rejecting what is essentially can be a good thing if used right, if used wisely.
Yeah, and I think the thing you're talking about as a potential problem is just an immaturity, just a lack of wisdom. To somebody who holds the no college position, my question would be, why any school at all? Why are you drawing a line arbitrarily at grade 12? Like, what is it that magically happens then? Why do you do any education? Let's answer that question first. And I think you get the answer then to college. If you think educating your kids is worthwhile, then it's a weird position to say, but no college is good. I would also ask a person that espouses that position to name for me 5 individuals who have changed the world in important ways, whether the church or technology or politics or fill in the blank, who didn't go to college. Name for me like 5. I think you'd be hard pressed. So yeah, I definitely don't hold that position.
And I know in context that you also believe that the world is significantly and primarily changed by thousands and millions of normal people doing normal things, right? As a context to that. Let's briefly go from the no college ever for anyone position to the, hey, I don't think it's right for me, or I don't think it's right for my son, which is a very different position, right? Because it's not an absolute position, it's a tailored decision for one person. So very briefly, what is a path to mature, for a young man, let's say, a path to mature Christian creation mandate lifelong mission? What does that look like for a young man who chooses not to go to college? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and we kind of already addressed this right at the very beginning. What is education for? And if it is simply just, I feel like I need to get the degree, I need the piece of paper, it's going to help me out, I don't know that is the best reason to consider college then. Have a plan. But this really goes back to, if somebody comes to me and says that, I want to dig more, because what work have you built in at this point to get your child to this point? Is it simply that, like, if they come to me and they just assume, okay, well, it's clearly the next step is college, what should I, which one should I choose? Well, then that, I would try to break it down on that way. If they come to me and just say, what you're asking is, I have this really sharp young man, but college is out of the question, well, then I want to dig further as well into it. I want to see, okay, well, why are you saying that? Because he's a pretty sharp young man. He seems to be pretty faithful. What is your plan? It very well could be that this young man just wants to be a godly, he wants to be a father, a husband, and an auto mechanic. And you've already set him up to apprentice under a godly auto mechanic who's teaching him all the things he needs to know. And maybe he's got a job sweeping the warehouse at an auto shop and is learning. And if you bring that scenario to me, I was like, go for it. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you're kind of aimless and you haven't really brought your kid to they haven't matured appropriately, college may not be the best place for that kid. And I think I'm going the wrong direction.
No, this is good. I just want to make, yeah.
You said the person that doesn't want to go to college. I keep going back to the person that says they want to go. Sorry about that.
No, this is highly relevant. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure that we're understand where we are in terms of, we're going to talk about college, but we don't want to make it seem like that's the ideal path generally, or it's the best pass in every case. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll show my cards and say I think it's the ideal for Christian kids generally. I don't think it's the only way, and I don't think it's sinful not to. I would challenge the family that's saying, hey, we're not going to send our kid to college, or the kid who's saying I don't want to go to college. I challenge him to tell me, what are your plans? What are you going to do? And it needs to be at least as hard or harder than college. So if your reason for not going to college is I'd like to be lazy and not work very hard, I don't want to challenge. I'd like to just chill and play video games and do social media and just work an easy job. I would just challenge them with Jesus's challenge that to whom much is given, much is required, and say what have you been given? How are you turning a profit on what you've been given? And it's absolutely true that there are some people for whom they haven't been given the gifts, to really take advantage of a college education. And so for those people, of course, but I think I don't think that should be, I don't think that should be the norm necessarily. So yeah.
And conversely, I think some would point out, and you would probably agree with this, that sometimes the lazy path can be to go to college. Right? Sure. And that's true for many, and it can be a very expensive, lazy path. Here are some things that I've heard out of the lips of actual young people in churches we've been a part of over the years when someone approaches them about college. Well, my parents have always talked to me about going to college, so I guess I'm going to college to get a job, to buy a house, maybe get married, buy a truck. And yeah, so I guess I'm going to college. And sounds like a lot of fun. frankly, I can't wait for all the freedom it affords. So there's a young person, particularly in the case of a young man, let's say, what I'm thinking of, who has not given it any serious thought and is probably succumbed to the factors at play in his life in the fat, dumb, and happy stage of civilization where he's wealthy. I mean, like upper middle class wealth, like those of us in this town, many of us. And no one's really challenged him to make hard decisions or to really ask him what his mission in life is or what his purpose. And this is what you get. Well, I guess I'll go to Auburn. My parents went to Auburn, and I don't know. Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. So we definitely don't want that, right? So let's get language precision, or definitions can help enrich in a conversation so that we're talking more meaningfully about specific aspects. So in contrast to the negative caricature that I just put out, here are some reasons. I thought of some reasons that people might choose to go to college. And they might choose to go for a number of these reasons or just one. And I'll say that in my opinion, some of these reasons are good, some might be good, and some are bad. And we'll talk through these maybe. Let me first say that I really like the definition of the distinction between education and skill training that Ben Merkel uses, the president of New St. Andrews College. It may not be original with him, but he defines education as essentially Christian liberal arts training in how to think, being a culture shaper. So I'm going to use, in my comments, I'm going to use that definition of education. Then I'm going to call skill training, training to be in college, a nurse, a dentist, an engineer. All right, so I'm going to call that skill training, not education. So you may not like that, but that's how I'm using it right now in what I'm about to say. Okay, so here are some reasons to go to college. A lifelong identity. The team, the football team, the colors, the pageantry, my social network for the rest of my life in northern Alabama, I want it to be basically crimson and silver or burnt orange, and these are my people. And I'm just admitting that. That's what I want. I want to join the tribe that my parents were in because it's a part of our life forever. Another reason to go is sports. Another reason is skill training. Another reason is a credential. I just need this piece of paper, or I just want this piece of paper. And notice that the credential may come with skill training, or you may get a credential and not actually get any skill training out of it at all. So I'm distinguishing those. Another could be a Christian liberal arts education, or what I'm terming education. Another reason to go to college would be to increase exposure to potential spouses. So I hope that that a marriage results, or there's increased likelihood. Another could be waiting. I want to do something productive while waiting on the guys to grow up or finish college themselves. In other words, in our culture, the way it is, I don't know what the Lord will do, but often there's this kind of waiting period, and I'm a young lady, and I want to do something productive, and I think I want to do college. Another reason to go to college might be testing and strengthening, an incremental step into the world, going away from my family and my local church to even a Christian college where my doctrines are tested, my Christian faith is tested, I'm exposed to a greater variety and degree of sin in the world, and it's kind of like a halfway step towards jumping into the deep end of life in the world. So I have used some of these reasons for sending our kids to college. I've talked to others who implicitly or consciously have stated these reasons. So there's a bunch of reasons. React to that. How do you approach it? Larson's already said he's big on education as a primary means. Any thoughts there? Any other factors that might be at play?
Yeah, I think all those are good and they're legitimate reasons. But, again, I always want to go back to what have you done leading up to this point? And this is the question, and it's come up in other scenarios as well, and it's Doug Wilson refers to it as putting money in the bank when they're younger so you can make those withdrawals. I mean, you're the ability to make those, the choices become broader when you have raised up a child that you can send out that will make wise choices when they go. And because it's true, there's only so much you can do. You can say, okay, here is a good church I think you ought to be a part of. Now, then go off a few hours away or more. You don't know that will happen, right? But a wise child will go and establish themselves in a church. They will find wise people to attach themselves to in that scenario. And then the options are much broader there. All those things can apply to a child that's been raised well that you can trust to send out. If you haven't done that and now you're at this stage, there's a few of those scenarios where I would say that's probably not the wisest thing. Maybe keep them at home and go to, UAH or go to another option that's right here, where they are part of this community, still growing and learning, still under your roof, still under your protection.
Very good.
So I would add that.
Yeah, those are all good. I'd say, I think I think all of those reasons you gave are all legitimate and valuable in their own right. Some of them less valuable, but I think a lot of those are. I think marriage is a great example of something that happens in college. People often find spouses, and it's a spouse who's very equally yoked, with you, shares your values, and so a lot of folks, who aren't part of a large church and are looking for a spouse, I think it's a very strong choice to send your kids to college with that as one of the hopes. What I'd say is, we don't necessarily know what you're going to do with your career, but we do know for sure that if you're a man, it's a good thing to desire to be an elder. And so how are you preparing for that? You're going to be a husband, Lord willing, if you're a man. How are you preparing for that? You're going to be a citizen of a city and a state and a nation. How are you preparing yourself to be informed and to fulfill those duties well? And so I think we narrow it to just the skill part that you were talking about, and not the education part. I think our problems and our criticisms with education or with higher ed today are precisely our problems with it are precisely their failures to fulfill the mission of higher education. And so we're upset that colleges no longer educate people. You just go and it's a 4-year party, and that's true of so many colleges, most colleges, I would say. And so I think being critical of that and wanting to avoid that is wise. But that's not the only game in town. Just one last point I'll make is that I think if you look at the world around us and the problems we see in the world around us, I think we could all agree that the problem is not that there are too many well-educated Christians out there in the world, right? I don't think that we have this overabundance of well-educated Christians and we just need fewer of those. I think the problem's the opposite. I think I think you guys see in kind of a pastoral context, there are a lot of fools, a lot of people who just don't have much of an intellectual immune system, who haven't trained their minds to think rationally, to take thoughts captive and take arguments captive and evaluate them logically. And so we have a lot of people that just fall for really dumb stuff. And I think that's an education problem. It's a training problem. So we got to fix that. Okay, one last point. Sorry. I'll also say that we have to, I think we have to, on this question, and this applies to primary and secondary school too, we got to remember that we're sinners and our flesh wants to be lazy, right? And so it's really easy for us to do something because our flesh wants it, and then to justify it by calling it virtuous, right? And so there are a lot of families, I'm not accusing anybody in this room, I'll accuse myself. There's a lot of families who do homeschool and say they're doing it because it's virtuous and because everybody in our church does it and it's a good way to do school. But in fact, you're really just kind of lazy and undisciplined, and you don't like getting up early every morning and driving to school, and your kids are lazy and they don't really want to work, and it's hard to make them work. And so we got to be, and the same, I would say the same is true in like the work from home thing. I have a company and most of my employees work from home, and it's there's a similar temptation there to say I'm doing this because it's better for work, I'm more productive at home or whatever, when really it's like, also I don't like having to get up and take a shower and like drive to a job and actually work all day. So I think that we have to just, when you're the kid that's going, no, I'm not going to go to college because I want to do something that's more virtuous, just have the maturity to see what your heart, what maybe is going on in your heart.
That's really good. So where the direction we're going with this conversation is admitting that this is a many factored issue, and we've already listed, I've listed, and we'll come back to some of the factors that people might think of when they think of a college. But there's even more factors, right? In our family, we talk about learning in the books and learning between the books. And to me, learning between the books is often equally as potent or more important than the learning in the books in the formal syllabus at a school or an environment. And we know that's true. So examples of things that are between the books are your friends, your church, your local church. Maybe you have family nearby while you're at college, and and uncles and aunts or cousins, and they become a big influence on your life for good or bad. So these are other factors that significantly shape a student while at college. What do you guys think? How important are these other factors, particularly maybe the local church?
I think community is huge. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest influences on kids, and a lot of times the concern is, well, what if my kid goes to school and they're going to learn, what's that movie? There was a movie that came out about the professor, and there was the big, what was that? God's Not Dead or something like that. Anyways, that's not, to me, is really the concern, right? The concern there is simply that you have a kid who's starved for leadership, and because they haven't got it, and then maybe that professor takes an interest in them. But just going to school and having a biology teacher that teaches atheism or evolution is not going to, if your kid's well educated and trained already, that's not going to turn them. What will turn them is the community that they form around themselves, their best friends, the people that are into the same music as they are, the people that are into the same sports as they are. So you have to think about that when you go to college. That's why I would say one of the most important things is to establish a good church for them to go to if you're going to send them off to college. Make sure there's a community around them of people who are wise, Christian, godly people who will invest in your child while they're there. So yeah, community is huge. And even now, as a grown man, there's communities that I don't want to be a part of because of the influence. Of course, online is huge. That's why we harp on online stuff so much. It's not because we just think internet is bad. It's because it's so dangerous. And I'll admit, I'm so naive to the dangers of that. I didn't even realize how bad it was out there until I started poking around a little and seeing how quickly kids can get caught up in the wrong crowd and then change their views like this. And adults can do it too. We're seeing it right now with some of the just the controversies going on and how quickly people listen to podcasts or follow a Twitter account and then immediately just kind of, I agree with everything this guy is saying now. And kind of what you were saying earlier, just this, there's not thoughtful, it's sort of just being blown wherever the winds take you because it seems reasonable. Scripture has something to say about that. Colossians 2. About not being through philosophies of the world carried away, and those philosophies can come from any direction. They can come. They're not just the things that we think about in terms of college. It's not just atheism and evolution. It can sneak up from anywhere. It can sneak up through shared interests in music, shared interest in video games or sports or whatever it may be.
So what about the parachurch? I'm at college. I've been kind of hopping around, and but I got a great group at the Navigators or InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, or Baptist Student Union, and that's my church while I'm in college.
Yeah, I think that's really dangerous. I think that is what modern Christians do, and that's how we think. And I think it's a failed model. I don't think it works. I think your kids need to be part of a church. And so, if you're thinking about going to college, I would hope that your kids would prioritize this as highly as you parents do. But being a part of a Christian community, I went to a school, New St. Andrews, where I don't feel like I went to a college. I went to Moscow, and I was a part of the Moscow church community, and college was part of that. It felt like the community life, the church life, was so much bigger and so much more important than the college life. And so I think that's hard to pull off, and I think most colleges kind of, become it becomes a universe of its own. And I think that's just a danger that colleges have to fight against. And I think students need to be aware that if you go to college and your parachurch organization becomes your church, you are being catechized in this worldview of this parachurch worldview, where your religion can be something that happens outside of the church. And I think that's a real dangerous place to be.
Very good. So church is important. So there's a joke, a tongue-in-cheek joke about picking a church, and you may have heard different versions of it, but it goes something like this: liturgy, music, community, pick two. Right? You ever heard that? Everybody wants a church that has wonderful, teaching, liturgy/teaching, or doctrine, and the music you like, and then friends, and you only get to pick two. So I bring that up to say that we live in a constrained world, right? We often have resource constraints, namely time and money. We also have legitimate needs and tension, right? And so this is the challenge of wisdom decisions, is these trade-offs. And this is a many-factor trade-off decision: education, college, and the stakes are really high. Emotions can run high. So here's some examples of values and tension. Man, all else being equal, I really think this school is a good fit for my son or daughter, given that we've decided that he or she's going to college, and it's 2,000 miles away. So I'm only going to get to see them in the summer and at Christmas and maybe Thanksgiving, although that's expensive. Or, there's a good school, it's a good location, got some cousins nearby, so we got some connection there, but there's no good church options. What do we do? Another one, well, we don't have a lot of money. We'd like to, because of the characteristics of our son or daughter, their personality, their maturity, whatever's going on, maybe they're very impressionable still, I'd like to keep them close to home. Like, I'd like them to be at our church, in our home regularly, so I need to send them as a commuter student locally, which in our case often is UAH. But it's a secular school. So what do I make of that? So we're familiar with these trade-offs, right? This is very challenging. So any thoughts on, I know this is a broad question. We're going to open up to questions soon, so get your questions ready. How would you approach that? What do you prioritize? It depends, right?
I think your three factors are a really good paradigm, and I thought about the way you phrased that, and I would think about it this way. So you've got distance, kind of quality of the school and churches. What was the third one? Community, right? Yeah, so those are the three.
And of course, there's finances too, which is a huge factor.
Yeah, that's another one for sure. I'm going to ignore finances because I haven't thought about that yet. But I would say that the strength of one of those can sort of create a need, an opportunity to care less about the others. So, for example, if the school is really, really good and the quality is really, really good, then the distance is not, and the community is really, really good, then the distance can be you can have that be a lower priority, especially with daughters. I know we're going to get into daughters versus sons, but yeah, I'll just say with sons, I'm not so worried about the distance. I'd be happy for him to go to, overseas. I kind of like the idea of a son leaving and going on an adventure and all of that if he's ready for it. But let's say for daughters, if so back that up. If the community's bad, there's not much community. I'd want them closer to home. Or if the school is not great, I'd probably want them closer to home. So I think it's a good paradigm, and I think you kind of have to balance those things. But I think if the community and the school are really good, then distance should be less of a concern.
Let me ask something about that that's relevant for people in this town. There's a lot of engineers here and a lot of people sending their kids to get engineering degrees, let's say. So if you buy into my use of engineering being skill training and not Christian liberal arts education, you could have both, right? But let's call it skill training. Then can you see a situation in which a mature young person who has a good worldview, culture, education outside of college, can you see a place for that young person to go to college to obtain a credentialed skill, particularly a young man? And there's no good Christian liberal arts training at that school in the books, at least. There might be in their local church or in their community, certainly in their upbringing, let's say. Could you see a place for that?
Sure. I mean, I still qualify it by is your son ready to do that? What have you done to prepare them for that? And again, then it varies accordingly.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I have friends, I have a bunch of friends who went on to be doctors and lawyers and stuff, and who did like an associate's at a good Christian school. So I do think there's like this thing that happens when you leave home that's really important, where it's like the concrete is still wet. And I think certainly this is my experience. I'm sure you guys would and gals would resonate with this. You're sort of trying to figure out, like, who am I? You know, like I know what my parents believe. I know what I was raised with. I think I agree with it. I think I believe it. But like I'm still trying to kind of take hold of it and sort of come into my own identity. You know, as an individual, as a man, as a woman. You know, as for me in my house, kind of thing. And so in my mind, that's a normal process, and I want that to happen in the best environment, you know, I can have that happen in. And so if you're sending them because they're going to be some PhD, you know, physicist or whatever, and you're sending them right out of the first thing they ever do out of the home is go straight to MIT or whatever. Again, if that kid's just rock solid, then by all means. If they're not, maybe sending them out for an associate's degree at a good Christian school and a good Christian community would be a good way for them to kind of firm up their own faith before they go out. So anyway, I think that I'm trying to kind of speak to that point. But yes, 100%. And I've had friends I've seen a lot of friends go out and go to business school or law school or whatever, medical school, very pagan kind of environments, but they had strong foundations from some education elsewhere, and they were able to go and just do really, really well, and be even salt and light in those situations.
One of the things you alluded to there is that, and we know this, right? Many of us in this room were at least college aged at one point, and humans in that age category, late teens, early 20s, tend to be at the height of or at the beginning of a high stage of caring about ideas, right? Abstract ideas, ideologies, and they also have a lot of energy, physical energy, to be passionate about ideas. We also at that stage of life have more advanced rhetorical skills, not just thinking but verbalizing than we did when we were younger, and so we tend to debate a lot and talk a lot about ideas, and that can be very good. If it's not directed well or trained well, of course, then you have, you know, the young men famously burning the world down, right, in that age category. So it's a very impressionable, important, crucible time where all of these factors are, you know, you have the height of sexual energy, you have, that's important to mention. I mean, all this stuff is swirling right there. And so it's basically like life with multiple exclamation points on it, and all these factors swirl together, and it's hard to predict. And so naturally we have to be very careful. Let's talk about maybe differences in how we might approach young men versus young women. So both the whether or not college question and the which college and how far, and would any of these factors be weighed weighted differently in your mind for a daughter versus a son? And you've already hinted at some of this.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I would definitely give more leeway to a son who is prepared for college in terms of the distance and and what you're sending him to do, which is honestly to get a degree, to start a career, to support a family, to be a leader in your community. But I also agree with Larson in terms of, I think it's great for young ladies to get educated, to continue their education. But as a father of young ladies, we take into consideration that there is a sense where I want to protect them, for them to be close. And even a phenomenal school like New St. Andrews, that I would highly recommend, even for us. When I went to council a couple years ago, Katie went with us, and I think she even saw that the distance. I mean, it's not easy to get there. It's a couple of plane trips and layovers, and if she needed her dad, it ain't going to happen that easily. And we have good friends that are up there, people that we trust. But at the end of the day, both of us came to this conclusion, and her mother, that no, it's better for her to be closer to home. But again, that's our personal preference with that, is to have her closer. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just try to offend a bunch of people real quick. So when Paul is talking about whether or not, when Paul is forbidding women from teaching or exercising authority over men in 1 Timothy, his justification for that point is that Eve was deceived. And I think Paul is speaking to this fundamental reality about difference between men and women. Men are sort of by nature designed to lead, and women are by nature designed to follow. It's a feature. It's not a bug. It's not a slight. It's something we honor in Christianity. We honor the weaker vessel. And so I think this comes into play. I think sending a woman off at a young, impressionable age, I think it's naive to think they're not going to be inclined to follow in a way that certainly men are vulnerable to, but I would say are less vulnerable to. I had guys come up to, when I was in college, who came in, to school with some strong theological convictions, and they were like, I'm not budging on this. And they didn't, right? They came up and they were like, I'm holding my ground. I think it's hard to do, for everybody, but I think it's particularly naive to think that your daughter's not going to be influenced by that. I would say that, considering your kid's frame is really important. So with sons, the question was about difference between sons and daughters. So I do think a son's trajectory is leaving and cleaving. I think a father's responsibilities to his son are different than his responsibilities to his daughter. The responsibility to protect, I think, it remains, with the father in a way that it doesn't with a son. And so I think you have to ask yourself, as a father, can I fulfill my duty and my responsibility to protect my daughter from X distance? And I think it's totally possible to do from 2,000 miles away. It's just really hard. And you just need to think through the logistics there and how that's going to work. So on the question of should a daughter go to college, again, I'm going to try to offend people. It's like, should a daughter be educated? Should a woman be educated? Of course she should be educated. It's us assuming that false narrative that education is only about getting a job, and we need to reject that false narrative. That's not what education is for. Education is for becoming educated. Do I want the mom of my future son grandkids to be as well trained as she possibly can? Absolutely. Do I want the future wife of my sons to be a brilliant, wise, shrewd advisor to my sons? Absolutely. Do I want my daughters to be like the Proverbs 31 lady, who is not lazy, is not idle, is working and very shrewd? Absolutely. So to me, it's a really weird place we've arrived at, where we kind of laugh at the idea of a young lady going to college when I just don't, I struggle with that one.
One of the issues I think for some that I've run into is this question: is it appropriate, generally, or can it be appropriate for a wife to earn money? And I think this is a elephant in the room question sometimes, or maybe not. Maybe it's an outright question. I've run into people who say, well, I don't think generally young women should go to college because the husband should provide and they shouldn't earn money. Now, one answer to that is, but that's not one of the primary purposes of college. It's education, not earning money, and you've covered that well. But the other, to address the other, is it wrong? Now, I know this is a whole big topic, but is it flat out wrong for a woman to partially or in an augmented fashion augment her husband's income, depending on phase of life and other important principles, all else being equal?
Well, I'll jump in. You're biased, obviously, but I 100% believe that a woman can and should, and we see this. I've seen this a lot in the church where you have women who are past the childbearing years and find themselves very disoriented because they don't know what to do now, and then you also have young ladies who, on the other end of the spectrum, marriage just isn't happening. You're not in control of when this is going to happen, or you're not having kids. You're unable to have kids. So if plan A is get married and have babies, that's great. I'm fine with that. But you're not in control, of either of those two things happening, right? And so you need to not be idle. You need to redeem the time. You need to make use of it. And God may have a plan for you that doesn't involve marrying early and doesn't involve having a huge family. It may involve you making a big impact in the workforce. So absolutely, I think there's nothing wrong with a woman working. Her orientation is towards the home, but again, she doesn't get to control kind of when and how that happens, and so she needs to be redeeming, being a good steward of her gifts.
Let's go to some questions. If you have a question, I don't think there's a mic, but I'll repeat the question. Or Jason's got a mic. Just put up your hand, and please keep it as narrowly scoped as possible. I know any question could be hours of discussion, but are there any thoughts, Megan?
Larson, you said that the goal of education is to be educated. Can you define for everybody what you mean by to be educated?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that's education is a lifelong thing. So that's part of it is developing a love for it. It's like teaching a man to fish versus giving a man fish. I think in primary school, it's a lot of giving a man a fish. It's a lot of just kind of hand feeding. I think in college, the desire is to give somebody the skills to be a lifelong learner, to love reading, to love researching, to understand how that works, to be able to kind of feed yourself. And so that would be a big part of it for me of what education is supposed to accomplish. Also, just instilling a love for learning. I think a lot of people graduate high school without that, love, and then in college find it, because the caliber of teacher is usually a lot higher, and a good teacher can make you just love education. That was my experience in college. I became obsessed with several authors and several topics and several things because I had teachers who were really great at what they did. So I'm not giving a very precise answer, but it is, in my mind, it's that just development of the skills and the love for learning.
I'll try and attempt to go more fundamental, because you're right, it was a circular answer, admittedly, right? So it begged the question. I've collected over the years, it's not a big hobby's probably a strong word, but definitions of education. Probably my favorite is one I happen to hear from Ben Merkel, and that is that education is the cultivation of a human. So then the question is, well, what is a human? And I would say a human, as intended in the created order, is a worshiper who obeys the creation mandate to rule the earth as a ruler, to be fruitful, to multiply, to exercise dominion, and everything you do falls under that. So an educated person will be better able to fulfill the creation mandate and worship in greater richness and glory to God's glory. There's an attempt. So how that looks in any specific life would vary, but there's certainly a low road and a high road. The roads can vary, but there's the lazy road where you're not embracing that. So I think what Larson's saying is an education can, in the best case and in the best sense, allow you to fulfill that fundamental mission to a greater degree.
Yeah, I've had 4 different college experiences, completely different experiences. Though when I went to seminary, one of the best things I learned there, that was the first time I was actually somewhere where I loved what I was learning, and the people that were teaching me for the most part loved it. And I think that's the biggest thing I took out of there. It wasn't so much the theology and doctrine, it was just learning to love learning. And then when I went and got my electrical engineering degree, I was in this job where we didn't need a degree, and then you could see down the pipeline you needed a degree coming in, and I worked with a lot of good men who could fix anything, and then they told them, you need a degree. And of course, we lost a lot of good men at this company. And because I learned to love and learned how to learn, I went ahead and got my degree, me and 2 other guys out of a department of 30. And the rest of those guys, they either put them in janitorial work or either just other jobs, or they lost their jobs. And meanwhile, what was coming in were these young men with engineering degrees, no work ethic, no love of work or love of learning. They were lazy, they had no character. You know, it turned what was a really enjoyable job to a miserable job. But yeah.
Other questions? Here's one right here.
To the guy in the college sweatshirt.
So, leaning back on my own experience as a senior in college now, I would say coming into college, many might say I was not wise enough to start college, and maybe not firm enough in a foundation to start college. That's also to say that I still had enough wisdom to seek out leadership in a church. But I would say that my foundation was not firm, and I went to a state school, and not to say that this is always the case, but grew in my faith in the Lord because of that. So I guess my question is, you talk about determining if your child is firm enough to go to college on their own. And I guess particularly for Larson, my question would be, is the predisposition to say that your child should go to college and they need a reason not to? Or is the predisposition that they need a reason to go and that they are firm enough to go?
Really good questions. So, you know, I have 2 sons who are college age. One who's in college, one who's not. And my third, who's right behind him, I think is probably going to go to the military and maybe do college after that. Is sort of my guess. If I was just calling my shots, I would say that's how I think it's probably going to play out. So it's just I say that to say 3 sons, same family, 3 pretty different paths. Because they're different kids, so at different stages of maturity and readiness. To your first thing that you said, I think there's a really great point, which is that a young man who's not really sure what they want to do with their lives could do a lot worse things than go to college when they're not really ready, right? It provides you with 4 years of a purpose and an identity, and some sort of direction. And I think that in and of itself is a really wonderful thing. There's a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds or 22-year-olds that don't have that and kind of wander and meander and, you know, become terrorists or, you know, like do bad things, right? So I think it's a far better thing to do than to do nothing. So I don't think a prerequisite is that you have a clear vision of where you're headed or feel totally prepared for it. I think it's one of those things a lot of guys develop an interest. I think I'm a big fan of like gap years or gap. I think there are a lot of young men who, I was one of these young men where I just wasn't ready, wasn't interested. I was interested in the missionary thing. I did that for 6 months, and then I did some work at our local church and just at a restaurant for 6 months, and by the end of that I was interested in college. So I think some guys it just takes a couple of years to sort of get there. But I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Perhaps it's like marriage, you need to be sufficiently prepared, but you're never fully prepared. There's a lot of learning in the doing, and perhaps that was your experience, and God was kind and kept you from going off a cliff. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been my response, is thank the Lord that he was faithful in that. It's kind of like the question of Billy Graham, right? You can't deny the fact that there was an impact and a lot of people came to know Christ, and yet we can still say that's probably not, like crusades are probably not the best method for, like it doesn't replace, it's nowhere as good as a church in community and families growing up in the faith and being shepherded, and like that is the ideal way that the church grows, not through crusades. And yet we can give thanks for people who came to Christ in those. Same thing, like we can all probably sit here and say, well, we went to public school and we went to college and I played sports and I turned out okay, but that's not what we're aiming for. We do want our kids to do better than what we did, and we do want to change the culture, and part of that is by being more thoughtful and being ready and prepared when we reach these stages like college or marriage.
I would also say, I think in this church, my hope is that every young man in this church would be prepared at that age to go to Texas A&M and do okay, right, and thrive. So I don't know that that's going to be the case, and I think that's where wisdom comes in. But I do think we do have this. We probably err on the side of overprotective in our community, and I think there's that can be unhealthy too.
And I'll give you an example of how overprotection can be underprotection. Everybody has a different story, but in my case, my family, going back generations, we have no geographic roots. So foreign missionaries lived in a lot of different places. So there are downsides to that. One of the benefits, though, is you are forced to grapple with the cultural things or the elements in your life that are different in different localities, and that's okay. And which things should be fundamental to Christian living and should not vary no matter where you go. If you don't transplant ever, then you're never really forced to deal with that. And I'll give a caricature of a negative case. You grew up in one church, it's all inbred, everybody marries each other, it's very inward looking, and you've been in that church for generations, and someone changes the carpet color, and you lose it. And and there's a little bit of sort of hypothetical, but not really, right? Because why? Because you have no sense of what's fundamental and universal and important and what's just a local thing. In that case, obviously, somewhat of a triviality. When you go to college or another experience, and you run into different ideas, and you're like, well, they're doing things differently here. Is that okay or not? That's a really important question. That's a part of the cultivation of a human. Let me throw out a framework for answering maybe some questions, the right questions in the right order. Here's an attempt, and then we'll have time for one more question. And this goes way upstream of college, and you'll get the drift. First question. Okay, so someone says, should I go to college? Well, what's your mission or potential mission area for your life as a young man or woman? Like fundamentally, my fundamental mission is to glorify God. That's level 0. Okay, got it. Give me more detail. The creation mandate and the Great Commission. Okay, that's more detail. Good. That's universal for Christians. That's layer 2 of the pyramid. Let's go to level 3. For your specific life, what do you think it's going to look like? What are your gifts, your passions? Well, I don't know yet. Well, what could they be? Well, I think I might like science or engineering. Okay, so you're going to provide, exercise dominion, be a sub-ruler as an engineer in Huntsville. Okay, so you have a potential mission area. Or for a young woman, right? I want to be a wife and a mother. I want to raise sons and daughters who are culture shapers. All right, so now we've identified a potential mission area for you in your life, specifics for you. Second, what do you need to prepare for that mission? I mean, I'm just approaching this like an engineer, right? You have a mission, okay? How are you going to prepare for it? Okay, now the next question, is college necessary or, because in some cases it might be, you might need a credential for your mission, is college necessary or beneficial for the preparation that you've identified you need as one part of the preparation? If yes, what are your objectives for college? Is it credentialed skills? Is it education, Christian liberal arts education? Then what can you afford based on savings and scholarships without going into debt? Then what areas of life preparation are not part of the colleges that you're considering, and how will you fill those gaps? Am I generally a follower and impressionable, or am I strong in my Christian convictions? What risk do these traits in me present based on different college options? What will church life be like at a particular college? Where will I find friends who will make me more Christ-like? Who will be my community there? So these are some questions that we've batted around that are important in considering this. Let's go to another question if there is one. Chris?
I'll just speak loud. Oh, there we go. College and marriage, it's been alluded to a little bit. There's kind of been a broader view in evangelicalism, I'd say over the generations, that it's better to wait to get married until both have a degree. A lot of sexual energy at that age that can lead to a lot of problems and dangers. Just wanted to get your guys' view on, if your son or daughter has a good godly relationship and they're ready at freshman or sophomore year, what are your thoughts on, getting married, stopping college at that point to get married, continuing on while they're married, stuff like that?
We have about 1 minute. So for me, it depends on lots of factors.
Yeah, I would just simply say to do hard things, that's why God gives a helpmeet to a man. I mean, so even college, I would say falls into that. I know many who get married and then still go to college, and actually it's a better situation. They have to work harder, but yeah, they're able to do it because they can work together. I'm more inclined to tell people, why not? Why not get married?
That was the norm. I feel like that was the norm not that long ago, that you go to school, you have a job on the side, and you get married at some point and start having kids. And I think our work ethic is, like, we just don't have the work ethic anymore to consider doing all of those things at once, but we should.
But there's a practical issue. You have to consider the beauty and gift that a baby is. And that should be a sought-after, fruitful outcome of marriage. And so you need to think about that, right? So if you're and it can look different in different situations, but you want to make sure you don't create a collision of values that then cause a crisis, right? So you got to think through that. Well, we're out of time. Our hope is that this will generate conversations, continue conversations between us and community. We obviously haven't gotten to the end of all these threads, but we need to prepare for worship. We're done. Thank you.